Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about the movie Total Recall, with starring Arnold Schwarzenegger from 1990. This isn't going to be a review. This movie is 23 years old, and I figure most people know the story if they haven't seen it already themselves. But I watched it last Friday in anticipation of watching the new one from 2012 in the near future. I picked up a copy of the remake recently for like $5. So I was going to try to get the old one in my head and then be able to compare the two. And I gotta tell you, it didn't age well. But I did get some interesting insights into it because I listened to it Friday night or Saturday night, one of the two, I can't remember which, with the commentary tracks starring Schwarzenegger and the director, Paul Verhoeven. Interesting to be listening to a commentary track with an Austrian and a Dutch accent. It was entertaining. And it's weird to think that Paul Verhoeven directed RoboCop, which is probably the best science fiction satire ever made. I love RoboCop. It's an awesome film and an awesome commentary on the time it was made. Whereas Total Recall didn't fare as well. I don't think Total Recall did a good job of representing the 1990s, let alone the year 2084, which is apparently when the movie's supposed to have taken place. There are so many things that just make no sense. The world just seems plastic and cheap. The projection of the future was so poor. Now, interesting, I didn't know this, but the movie Minority Report was supposed to have been the sequel in some ways to Total Recall. It was supposed to actually have been made, that storyline was supposed to have been made as a sequel to, directly as a sequel to Total Recall. And Minority Report, even with all its flaws, did a wonderful job of making the future look like the future. Of making things seem like our real world, but in the future. It did an excellent job. The only film I can think of that did a better job of really immersing you in the future completely was Fifth Element. And Fifth Element is such a gem, it's hard to compare anything to it. But, for example, even in 1990, you knew that car designs were moving to curves. And yet every vehicle in this movie has more angles than anything that was even present in 1990. It made no sense. The new brutalism that they used from Mexico, while interesting in some ways to an architecture buff such as myself, I really don't think conveyed what the future will look like. I really don't. I mean, even you can look at the designs of the present in 1990 and see some of the things that were going to be done in the near future, and it's not hard to do that, and see that that's not the direction that we were going in, and I don't think it was going to be the direction that would have occurred 90 years later. I could be wrong in that regard. Maybe new brutalism will make a wonderful comeback. But the basic plot line was flawed. After having watched this movie, I came to realize the character of Hauser / Quaid, the character that Arnold Schwarzenegger played, was utterly superfluous. Totally superfluous. And let's ignore the fact that they made some major guffaws about the fact that there's a distance between Earth and Mars. There's a significant difference between Earth and Mars. There is a time delay between Earth and Mars. But at the moment, I don't remember what the time delay is between Earth and Mars. So if you send a radio signal to Mars, and you want to reply, you have to wait a significant amount of time for that to happen. We're not going to be able to have a Skype call between Earth and Mars. And yet that's what happens in the film. Some of the main characters have a Skype call, which was amazing. There are no cell phones. Heck, Dick Tracy did wrist phones back in the 1930s, and they didn't figure maybe we'd have wrist phones in the year 2080 or something similar. They've got Arnold Schwarzenegger using a jackhammer. An individual guy using a jackhammer on a construction site. Yes, Arnold Schwarzenegger is a huge guy and well-muscled, and it makes sense that he's doing something manly, but this particular manly job isn't going to exist in 90 years from this point of this film. Alright? And not only that, but they have him working alongside another guy also using a jackhammer, and neither of them is wearing a safety helmet, safety glasses, or ear protection. Which is, I know they did because they want to get the visuals of the head, but that makes no sense. That would not happen. It broke my immersion of that scene even more than the fact that I'm watching somebody use a jackhammer in the year 2084. But in the second act, when the whole thing moves to Mars, by the way, they just skipped the entire trip. It's going to take you 3 months to get to Mars, folks. At the best, 3 months. And yet they kind of give it the impression that, it was just a hop, skip, and a jump. No, it's not a hop, skip, and a jump. It's really far away. Oh yeah, the famous head scene where he's wearing that robotic female head and that little section pops out. That little section pops out was this long. It would have been inside his skull. Yes, I know, it was what they had to work with. It was a fairly low-budget film in many ways. But still, I didn't really notice how silly that was until I watched it again last weekend. But in the second act, they introduce a character named Benny. Now, Benny is a cab driver. And he gets pulled into this because he's driving the cab for Schwarzenegger and his female companion. And all kinds of wacky hijinks take place, and Benny gets pulled in, and they're like, who is this guy? Can we trust him? And when they say this, Benny takes off an artificial hand and unfolds his hand, which has been folded against his forearm. And the fingers are like this long, and his fingers are all twisted. I mean, he's got like 2 of them or something. So you can tell he's a mutant. And since the rebels on Mars are almost all mutants themselves, he's one of us. Excellent. Oh yeah, the reason these people are all mutants is because they're supposed to be solar radiation has mutated them because the domes were made poorly. First of all, you'd live underground. And second, the radiation on Mars is going to be less than the radiation here. And Mars has an atmosphere. This film is telling people that Mars has no atmosphere, that there's a vacuum on the surface of Mars. The surface of Mars does not have a vacuum. It has an atmosphere, mostly carbon dioxide, and very thin, but it has an atmosphere. So, that made absolutely no sense. But, the character of Benny is the interesting one. So, as the film progresses, we come to learn that Benny is actually working for the evil corporation, or government, or whatever it is. Benny's a mutant. And Benny has either been turned to be an agent for the government by their total recall technology, getting into their head and rewriting their life, or he's an amoral bastard that'll just sell out anyone for a buck. It really doesn't matter which Benny is. The reality is that Benny is a mutant that can easily infiltrate the rebellion, is a taxi driver, so he has a perfect opportunity to make contact with his controller and be useful to the rebellion because he's a taxi driver, so he can make contact with people on a regular basis, lots of different people every day, and no one will ever suspect it. Oh yes, and speaking of being a taxi driver, there are no roads on Mars. Most of the cars are running through the same places where pedestrians walk. That's not efficient. Even a brutal dictatorship is going to make sure that there are proper lanes for vehicles so they can get from point A to B quickly. Yes, they may not care about the pedestrians, but they are going to care about the cars. And this film didn't. Yeah, I know they were looking for the Wild West frontier town, which I don't necessarily love that aesthetic much, because what is there to be a Wild West frontier town on Mars for? To the best of my knowledge, there's nothing worth mining there. It's a place to go have a colony because we can. This is something that would happen in like a post-consumer or a post-scarcity environment, and this film was not a post-scarcity environment. But Benny's the perfect character. He can infiltrate this rebellion, he can reveal all of their secrets, and the government wins. The character of Hauser/Quaid is unnecessary. You never have to have this thing on Earth. Going to Earth was useless. Having Hauser/Quaid on Earth did nothing for this movie whatsoever. Zero. It added nothing to the movie. You could have taken the whole thing on Mars, had Benny be the secret agent that infiltrates the rebellion, the government would have won, and you would have never had to bring the aliens in at the end. What the heck was that? Why have this alien thing at the end? That's supposed to have turned an atmosphere on in 30 seconds that saved all the people because they were being smothered to death. There's so much wrong with this movie that I didn't see the first time, or maybe even the first couple of times I saw it. But I haven't watched this movie in like 15 years, so my memory faded from it. For example, I didn't even remember Sharon Stone was in this movie. I had no memory of Sharon Stone, which is kind of, I guess, an opinion about her role in the film, because I couldn't remember her. She did an alright job, I guess. And Schwarzenegger was just a wrong character for this, or at least presented it the wrong way. He did great in True Lies, where he was a secret agent. But in this film, he just looked like a lumbering bodybuilder. He didn't give me the impression that he was a secret agent. They didn't need to bring him into the film. They didn't need this duplicity with is he working for them? Is he not working for them? Why did they have to rewrite his memory? He couldn't just be undercover like a real person. No, they have to mess with his memory and stuff. It just made no sense. Now I remember reading the Philip K. Dick book, story rather. We can remember that for you wholesale, but it was a long time ago, and I don't know how well this film adhered to it. But I can tell you, it probably didn't adhere too well because, for example, Blade Runner didn't adhere all that much to the source, to the novel. Do Robot Stream Electric Sheep? They were still great things, but they were separate entities. But this film, to me, did not feel like Dick in the least. It just wasn't very good, folks. And the plot holes were so glaring, it was astounding. You didn't need aliens. You didn't need Earth. The whole thing could have taken place on Mars, and Benny's the only character you needed. You never needed Schwarzenegger's character. He was utterly superfluous. And that just kind of made me sad. They made a film where their main character doesn't need to exist. And that's a big cinematic fail. So I'm looking forward to hearing people tell me what they thought about the original Total Recall. I don't want to stuff about the new one yet. I'm going to watch that hopefully this coming weekend. And I'll do a review of that shortly to tell you how I think it compared to the original. And I gotta tell you, I'm almost guaranteeing you, at least in depth and texture, it's gotta be better.